All right, guys, we're doing the Mount Rushmore of thrash metal. Oh, hey, guys, Podioslave Podcast, episode 104, coming at you right now. It's Anthony, we got Nate, we got Tony, another week. What's good, folks?
Yo, I'm good, man. I'm always happy when we're doing this, and we don't do it enough, even though we do it plenty. I do love this. It's every day for us, and it's because we are nerds of the highest order.
Yeah, I mean, we had a little hot mic moment there, Twan, but it's good because it gives a little, behind the music on how we do this, which is let's talk about, okay, oh, shit, we're live. Oh, yeah. And speaking of which, tonight was a little bit of a behind the music episode.
It was, Nate. And the thing is, if we did what I was just saying, we would be very stereotypical Revolver, Loudwire. We're not that, though. We're the alternative, right? Alternative press.
Revolver's stealing from us. I mean, let's be honest. that happened this week. So they took our 3-album run segment and made it an article on their website. So, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. And hey, Revolver, if you're listening, anybody there, thanks for being a podhead. We love you.
Hey, you know what? Let's back up here. If you're new, a carryover guest here or listener from last week's episode, the Vinny Caruana episode, thanks for coming back. We do this every week. We got a full catalog of everything that you want to hear, interviews, original content. So if you made it back here, welcome home. You're in a good spot.
Yeah, no, you're right. We circle back. We circle the wagon every week to geek out. And it's, I'm not going to say it's the best day of the week. It's a great day, though. I look forward to it every week. So
sometimes it's twice in one day. Who knows? I mean, shit. Yeah. But hey, guys, we had an absolutely phenomenal guest tonight. We had Scott Alderman. He is the author of the new book, Caravan of Pain. It is about the Tattoo the Earth festival that went off in the summer of 2000 with bands like Slipknot, Slayer, Sevendust, Sepultura, Head PE, Nashville Pussy, Mudvayne, and Hatebreed on the second stage. So we get into all kinds of how it happened, why it happened, some of the players, some of the stories from around it, and, the nerdery around putting together a festival like this with tattoos and music and, in a time that it wasn't really something that happened with Scott right now. So check out our interview with Scott Alderman right here.
Oh my God, brace yourself for the crusade. Tattoo the Earth. Live music from Slipknot, Slayer, Sevendust, Sepultura, Cold Chamber, Nashville Pussy, Head PE, and more. It's Tattoo the Earth, and it's what you want. Sunday, July 30th at Phoenix Plaza Amphitheater, featuring the world's best body and tattoo artists. Twin stages of continuous lethal music all day. Slipknot, Slayer, Sevendust, Sepultura, Cold Chamber, and more. Rain or shine, July 30th at Phoenix Plaza Amphitheater. Tickets are on sale now. Available through Ticketmaster, Ticketmaster charged by phone, and the box office. Click on tattootheearth.com for all the news and farmclub.com for music and video. This crusade will leave its mark.
What is up, Scott? Thanks for coming on the podcast, man. Really happy to have you on. We're all glad to geek out with you on your experience and what you've done with your career, especially with the Tattoo the Earth Festival, which was at this rate 22 years ago, which is insanity. So really appreciate you coming on, man.
My pleasure to be here and talk to you guys about it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. We talk, we kind of all three of us talk about, back in the day type stuff. We've gotten to that age where we can kind of geek out on, man, could have, should have, or we did see it, but, could have done more kind of thing. Tattoo the Earth Festival is one that I personally tried everything in my realm to get to that festival at Suffolk Downs. And I remember we were talking actually these guys that I'm pretty sure I printed out like the flyer and like all the stuff off Polestar and Blabbermouth and gave it to my buddy. And like, we have to get to this fucking festival. Like it's got every band that we're into. And we just didn't have a license at the time. So we couldn't get to the show. And here we are 22 years later talking about it in retrospect. So there's a little bit of show regret, which is one of our little terms on the Podioslave podcast. So we can kind of live vicariously through both your book and this interview today.
Excellent. I think every generation has that regret. Like I saw the Ramones. That was my big thing. Like when I was a kid at the Palladium in 1976.
Oh, wow.
But then I felt like I missed the 60s.
Yeah.
I missed Woodstock. I was too young for that. So every generation, even though they go through some really cool shit, always has that regret, you know?
Yep. Totally.
Yeah.
We all like literally log in Excel sheets every show we've ever been to. And sometimes it's good to just sit back and be like, I did that, you know, and not be hung up on, you know, the fest of the show that you missed. So it's good, good perspective.
You're right. Everybody's right. We're seeing the shows they're supposed to be seeing, you know?
Mm-hmm. So let's take it back just before that. We're going to talk to you about the book here in a minute, but let's find out about you as a fan of music to start. So what are your like first experiences with music? What do you remember kind of it getting its hooks into you with?
You know, I grew up, you know, in the 60s. So I really grew up on Sinatra and a lot of that stuff, my parents' stuff. And then I had two older sisters. So I really was just drenched in the Beatles and the Stones and the Turtles. And that's the music that I remember from my childhood. And really it was at 13, 14 when I started smoking weed and hit puberty that the rock and roll, the combination just set me on a road to ruin that I'm fortunately still on today.
Yep.
You know, so I've been listening to the Stones and that music my whole life, you know, the Who. But when I was 14, that's the stuff that just made me want to fucking drive fast and you know what I mean, and get high. It just hit me, and it still does, you know. So even though when I did the tour it wasn't necessarily my music, I knew what it meant to feel that way. And that's the important thing, you know. It wasn't moving me, but that's the stuff that just got me at that moment and changed my life, really did. So I just love rock and roll, but I love any music as long as it's authentic and it's well played. And I've teared up at, you know, Shania Twain concerts, and it doesn't matter as long as it's real and it's, you know. But I do like hard music. I love Nine Inch Nails. I love Tool. That's the limit of sort of I go to in my own taste. So Slayer and that stuff, that metal definitely wasn't on my radar at that time.
It's funny. On this podcast, we love literally everything. We have a saying, which we took from a local radio station, from Jewel to Tool.
Nice.
And it sounds like you could relate.
I think that's a porn film I've seen, to tell you the truth. So they may have stolen that. But yeah, no, absolutely. It doesn't, the songs that made me cry are all over the board, man. It's, you know, it's that moment, and the authenticity is key. And that's what I got from the metal bands that were on the tour, whether it was my thing or not, was, wow, these guys this is the real deal, you know?
So were there any like concerts or festivals or, you know, a certain night at a show that you were like, man, I like this. I want to maybe put something like this together?
When you mean at my show or just in general?
Or just working in the industry or anything like that?
You know, I mean, I'd worked in the music business when I was younger and owned a club and was a road manager and did some producing. I never really had a vision. I think everybody wants to put on Woodstock. You know, and when I'm sort of an entrepreneur, so that's what spoke to me. I'm not a musician. I wanted to be the guy on stage who sets it up. But when I had the idea for Tattoo the Earth, I was 10, 12 years removed from that. I had no desire to be back in the music business. It really wasn't on my radar. I was kind of done with it, you know, the music business. And then I had this idea that involved the music business and tattooing, and then all of a sudden I'm in the music business.
Yeah, right.
Man, you bring something up that I can somewhat relate with, because I lived in New York City as well. So I used to work at the Cornelia Street Cafe in Greenwich Village, and there was a little jazz cafe. So I remember thinking, like, this is a rad place to be. There's people coming through here that are absolute legends, and, you know, your local artist that's playing the same venue. So you said you managed jazz artists, and you bought the jazz club at 23 years old, which is
23 years
insane.
old. I was actually, just to back up a second, I wrote a memoir a couple of years ago. I was just batshit crazy growing up, man. I was struggling with my sexuality and drugs, and the 70s was a very bad time to be struggling with that stuff, you know? So I was just completely batshit crazy and got thrown out of college. I was a speed freak and a coke dealer. I got thrown out of 2 colleges, and then I found a job at a rock club, and I found my people, I found a reason to be part of a community and to work and something I believed in and people who believed in me. And then within a couple of years, I was road managing for major jazz artists, the Lionel Hampton, Charlie Bird, Barney Kessel, major tours of Europe, and then bought this club of Fat Tuesdays in 1984.
Wow.
The bad part was that on the other side, I was living this double life where I felt like a total piece of shit. And all the success that I got from being a fuck up just a few years ago made it just unbearable. And I started using heroin.
Oh, wow.
So over the course of a couple of years, I just sort of blew my life apart with drugs until I finally came out and got clean and sort of started my life anew in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that goes on, with the music business. And I write in the book about when I got clean, I had to put the music behind. Like when I used to do heroin, I used to like time it so I could, Gimme Shelter was playing as I went over the Williamsburg Bridge on my way to go buy it.
Oh,
the
wow.
music was such a deep part of that and just made me want to get high that I kind of put it to the side for a while when I got clean and focused on writing, and the idea for Tattoo the Earth sort of renewed that desire again, but I sort of put it to the side for a little while.
So there's definitely, that tells me that the fact that you came back to it, there's definitely a passion there. And that, whether it's the music itself or the music industry, like you said, drawn to the music at an early age, then you want on the management side, the club side, that tells me that you're definitely drawn to it. So I'm going to fast forward a few years, which, one of the vehicles for your whole book is the Tattoo the Earth tour. And, as heavy music fans that we are, we know that tour cold. I mean, there's Ozfest, Pledge of Allegiance, Tattoo the Earth. It's in the Mount Rushmore of heavy festivals. So, I mean, here we are 20 years later talking about it because you wrote a book about it, So I'm curious, why now? What's the impetus to put it all on paper at this point? Because we read it. It's a great book, great read. Every listener, go check it out. But we're curious about how, why now?
Well, when the tour blew up back then, and I've always been a writer, my first thought was, let me write a book about it. And I started to write it, and I just wasn't ready to write it. And if I'd written it back then, it would have just been bitter and really salacious because I left out a lot of the debauchery. It's just a different time. It would have been a different book that I absolutely would not be proud of right now, 20 years later. So in that respect, I'm glad I waited. But after I wrote this memoir about my early days, the stuff I was talking to you about, I was going to write my next chapter of my memoir, which is when I got clean and I worked in the AIDS epidemic and then ended up working for Morgan Stanley. Just crazy shit, just different, a different venue. And the pandemic hit. And I'm like, I don't want to write about the AIDS epidemic right now. And originally I was going to just write a 20th anniversary, oral history article of Tattoo the Earth and interview the people who were there and the bands. They do those in Rolling Stone and stuff. Yeah. And I started doing it. And then I realized there was a book and that I kind of wanted to write it because I didn't want to write the other one. And I just started writing the book. That's basically how it came about. It originally was going to be an article. And I spoke to a couple of them. I spoke to Shannon Larkin from Amen and Ryder Size from Nashville Pussy and a lot of people involved in the tour. And once I decided to write the book, I stopped speaking to anybody.
Nice.
I didn't want it to be, it wasn't a journalistic book. It wasn't that type of book about the tour. It was my story and the tour. So once I made that decision, I was like, I'm not chasing anybody down. And that's really how it came together. And then it you start writing something like anything and it came together and it seemed good and people so it just sort of had an organic thing.
I love how that came about because you open up like a shoebox of like photos and ticket stubs and you're like, man, there's so many stories that are kind of coming back to fruition here because now I'm in the moment to actually, rehearse this stuff. So it makes a lot of sense now.
And I have 20 years worth of pictures that I'm putting on Instagram and Facebook, this trove. Yeah. It's like the Beatles for new metal fans. It's like the Get Back tapes.
There you go.
Like stuff that's just blowing people's minds because it's just been sitting there, nothing face and like really fantastic tour photos. So it's really great to hear people it's blowing people's minds because they didn't even know it existed. People think they've seen every picture of something. So that part of it's been fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's a first person account. We had Lance Mercer, grunge photographer, on here from the early 90s, and same thing. We were like, is there anything we haven't seen? And he's like, oh, I have like, boxes on boxes of like B-reel and just like all sorts of photos that I haven't even published. And he started going through them after the podcast. And he's like, oh, actually, I'm finding some pretty amazing gems that have no one seen except for me. And I'm like, that's cool that we were kind of in an antithesis of that, Yeah. So.
What's funny is I don't know what I have. So one of the first pictures I posted on Instagram was a picture of Clown from Slipknot with this weird, he has someone else's mask on that they threw up on the stage, which is a really rare photo and confirmed what the Slipknot mask intelligentsia thought was the case. And it just became a whole thing. I didn't know. It was a throwaway picture to me. I didn't know it was the most valuable thing in my collection, It's really funny. So every time I put something up, they're like, hold on a second, this confirms this. I'm like, oh man, I'm just going to throw it up there and you guys tell me what it means.
The internet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So how did you come up with the idea for the festival? Let's talk about that. Let's see. You had this epiphany. We read it in the book, but tell us what you were thinking.
I wasn't thinking. I had just had a lot of success and a really tumultuous time in my life, and was trying to figure out what to do next. And I really didn't know, and I was starting to get frustrated. I had said for many years, if I had the money and the time, I would think of what I could do. And here I had the money and the time, and the whole thing was wide open, and I was starting to get really frustrated. And then Sean Vasquez was tattooing me. And I was just talking about how I want to put on something. I want to put on a big show, like a giant freak show, a big something. And I just said, tattoo the earth. And from that second, and that's why I can identify that literally the time that it happened, I did nothing but try to get that off the ground.
That was actually going to be one of my questions. Like, had it, like in the book, you say not only the date, but the actual timestamp. I'm like, how the hell do you know the exact timestamp? It's because you had a tattoo appointment.
I had a tattoo appointment with Sean, and he had just started it. It was like 15 minutes, 20 minutes into it. And then he stopped. And then he and I went out that night, and I just started and that's why I stopped talking about it as a vision early on, because then people are looking at me like I'm crazy. But I went home that night. He and I went to this club, and that night I went home and just basically taking dictation. I really thought I was having a psychotic break, and I spent the whole night just listening to music and weeping and dancing and writing down a template for something that ended up happening. Wow. Exactly how I imagined it. And that was the key for me right from the beginning. I could close my eyes and I could stand in it and see it, and people knew I could, and I just thought of nothing but that, and until I could get it off the ground. It was a total, I don't know what you want to call it, but I say in the book, I sort of cracked and ended up on stage at Giant Stadium. So I better play. I could ended up in a psych ward,
Yeah, you did the right thing. You ended up on stage at Giant Stadium.
Yeah, exactly. Given the choice. So it was always that for me. At every moment, it was a vision quest. Mm-hmm. It was this. It was just a calling. So that was really the idea. And then from that moment, originally it was going to be a 3-day festival, because I sort of come from the Woodstock era. And the funny thing is now 3-day festivals are completely in vogue. Back then, they were moving away from them. You remember Woodstock 99?
Yeah.
They had the riots and the fires.
Nate was there.
I was there.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. So they were moving away from that. I write in the book, we threw 50,000 Tattoo the Earth flyers into the rave at Woodstock 99.
Oh, wow.
For a show that had no dates, no tour. We had nothing going on at that moment.
Wow.
And we got written up in Rolling Stone that these assholes drove through the rave in a van and threw out these cards, swag. And that was us. I was really very proud.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I love the context that you paint in the book, which really illustrates that time period. Tattoos were taboo. And I was trying to think of in 2022 what the equivalent is, and I can't even do it. Back then they were probably more taboo than pot is now,
Oh, absolutely. It was illegal in Massachusetts. We couldn't tattoo at our Suffolk Downs show. It had just been legalized in New York a year or two before I walked into Sean's shop. And I if you look at a picture of the 2000 Dream Team, Olympic Dream Team basketball team, there's not a tattoo in sight.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So it was very hard to find mainstream tattooed people, who weren't metalheads and wrestlers, and so it was really very underground, and it's hard to imagine it that way right now with the way it's become. But back then, it was outlaw, and I write in the book, we went to Iowa and they ended up banning us. And, we came to Iowa with Slayer and Slipknot and tattoo artists for their children, and they didn't take kindly to it, and this was 22 years ago.
Damn.
But yeah, it wasn't the way it is now. It wasn't the way it is now.
Did you know at the start of this how ballsy it was to kind of drop everything and throw all your eggs into this basket?
I've always been that kind of person, so I was ready for it. I was ready for it, and I had the bread, and I had no one looking over my shoulder. And from the moment I had the idea, everybody believed in it, and everybody gave me their best contact. Like I talked to someone and he'd go, hold on, I know Ace Frehley. Let me get Ace on the phone.
Wow.
Of course, Ace is like, what's Ace going to do? Or anybody, not Ace personally, but just in general,
Yeah, absolutely.
But people were always like, that's how I ended up in front of Irving Azoff. Within just a month of having the idea of writing a pitch book, I'm sitting with Irving Azoff, who now and then was one of the most powerful people in music. And Don Kirshner and Lyle Tuttle, like major players. So the idea just resonated, and then my buzz from it and my abilities helped push the thing forward.
It's insanity. It's like this duality, because it's like you're moving from like corporate life to, like, as you said, traveling circus. Like I think you said in the book, I was the head counselor of the most fucked up summer camp ever.
But you know what, man? To me, it's all the same.
Yeah,
and I have to tell you, it's all the same to me. It's, if I've done conferences with 500 doctors in England and I've emceed Tattoo the Earth, to me, it's just a change of wardrobe and tone. Because if you believe what you're doing and then it doesn't matter if you know your material and you believe what you're doing. So that part of it, like working in the corporate world, I could write, I do my own web stuff, and so I had all of the pieces, and Tattoo the Earth was the first thing I'd done in my life where I got to use everything. The business smarts, the writing, being a massive prick, being whatever it took to get it done. You don't get these things done by being, I was out of my mind. I would not be stopped. I didn't want to talk about anything else. I was probably pretty hard to live with. I was 100% into it. So it was one of those moments where everything came together, and I'm like, whoa, man, I got all the tools to be able to do this.
I mean, you're jumping on flights across the world just to have a conversation with someone. It's
wherever. Wherever. And that's what I was doing. I was going out to LA. It's like, oh, Be Real wants to talk. Sure, let's go out to LA. I was just traveling nonstop. What I did, and I never did since, is I kept a really detailed journal, and it's the only time I have. So when you read that book, a lot of that detail, I transposed it into an Excel spreadsheet, and I have literally everything I did for that year and a half. I was trying to get it off the ground, who I saw, where I was, everything. That was the foundation for the book. The tour, I don't remember a thing. That's a whole other story, because I stopped that. But that's where I had a lot of that, I remember it. So that's where the detail comes from. But yeah, I would go anywhere. Didn't matter.
And that's interesting, because that's the business acumen that you're talking about that is weaved into the punk rock, mentality that made it happen, right? So what you're saying right now is, if it wasn't for part A, the corporate world, this would never have happened in the first place.
Absolutely.
You have to have that kind of organizational skill.
And this was the part of me as personally that it was a really important thing. And when I say the Tattoo the Earth saved my life, because, as someone who's bisexual, someone who's creative and wrote a book, and also is a corporate person, all these different things, as I go through my life, everybody wants to be one thing. So, my goal and what Tattoo the Earth helped with was just integrating it all. I don't have to be one thing. I can do something. And like, I'm doing the book, I'm doing the web for the book, I'm doing I do that stuff.
So the rubber's got to meet the road at some point. You've had the idea, you've flown all over the place to talk to people. People are into it. Now you've got to get musicians. You've got to get tattoo artists, body artists. Yeah. What did you have in mind for this?
I had in mind like Aerosmith, because I'm a classic rock guy. So I was thinking Aerosmith, I was thinking a big Woodstock type mainstream event. And early on, I realized I was never going to get Aerosmith or any of those bands. I really was so far detached because I'd separated from music that I hadn't even been to a show for the most part for 10 years. I mean, I was out of touch.
Wow.
So originally, like when I sat down with Azoff, I wanted the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I thought they would be great, but I had no idea what I was doing. And that's when I realized I needed to go, I say in the book, like Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, because I was almost 40. I basically put on my own Kenneth Cole boots and traveled and went to 100 and whatever, 50 shows around the world, just trying to figure out what I wanted to sell and who I was doing it to, and hang with the kids and the bands and experience it. And that's the part of it that most of my corporate friends wouldn't be able to do with any legitimacy. And I'm able to do that because I'm a freak and I have all these different sides, and that's a side of me too. And that was apparent. It didn't come off awkward when I was hanging out with these bands because I like to hang. I just also happened to be a business person and a writer and this and a that and whatever. So that's where Tattoo the Earth was very important for me as a person, because I got to use all those skills and could talk to anybody.
And bands can see through that. If you're, suit and tie, it's like, well, fuck you. You're just here for the money, Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why when I met with Cypress Hill, it's like, well, one of the first things I did, which I did several times, is a Cartoon, who's a tattoo artist in LA. I gave him a spot on my arm and let him freehand. I didn't tell him what I wanted. I'm like, which is the equivalent of like, I don't know, like, paying tribute to somebody.
Yeah.
That I trust you. So that first trip to LA with Cypress was really about meeting with Be Real, and everybody feeling each other out. And that's where a lot of people would just get stopped at the gate because they wouldn't know how to hang.
Absolutely.
So that's where this, I had a lot of the things necessary to do this, because like I write in a Jack Utsick, who's now in jail for 18 years, who I almost did this with. He had millions and millions of dollars and wanted to get in the music business, and they wouldn't let him in. It's a very tight club. So it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much passion. There's a lot of shit that you have to navigate in order to find your way through it.
Yeah, there's only so many people I think it's just you and Kevin Lyman that put on the Warped Tour that I can think of that are able to kind of get through that barrier.
Kevin did it. Kevin gave me a blurb for the book. I sent the book to Kevin as soon as I finished it. And it inspired him to want to write one. I think he's going to teach it. He teaches out in USC right now in California, a class on the music business. And I think he's going to teach it in the fall, which was pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, we came, and I write in the book that people always were like, I'd get emails, because there was no social media back then. Email was the thing, and I get emails. You guys, you big corporate assholes, why aren't you playing? And I'm like, it's me in my underwear, just terrified at 3 a.m, smoking weed, and just like answering these emails. Just like we were not a big corporate thing, but people thought it was because of the stature of it. But it was really just me and my partner, just literally dancing for our lives.
And we can relate on a much smaller scale on this podcast. And you, with as far as like the gatekeeping goes, and how the industry is controlled by just a few people. And you write in the book that the live music business seems like a vast, complicated enterprise, but it's controlled by relatively few people.
Yeah.
And that like spoke to us big time.
And it's the same people as it was 20 years ago. That part of it has not changed. Live Nation's stranglehold on live music has not changed. If anything, it's only everything else has ebbed and flowed, and that has not changed one bit.
And that's why your tour was in a golf dome, right?
Yes, exactly. Because we pissed Sharon Osbourne off, and they pulled half the dates once we announced them. Took all the amphitheaters away, so we were left with rodeos. But, I write in the book that I made my first attempt for Tattoo the Earth and met with Irving Azoff and Lyle Tuttle and realized I needed to get dirty and get in there. And then I got Jack Utsick, who had a lot of money, and I got Cypress Hill to commit. And it didn't matter because the agents weren't behind it. It didn't matter what the bands wanted. And that's when I realized I needed an agent, that they really controlled everything. And that's when I found my partner, who was able to navigate the agents, because he did that regularly. So I think that going after the bands gave me credibility, but I don't know if it got me anywhere. I remember meeting Flea backstage at a show and talking to him about Tattoo the Earth. And he's like, I love the idea. I do whatever my manager tells me to do, man.
Yeah.
Oh man, I've heard that.
Here's his number, and I believed him. I wasn't like, oh, I'm like, oh, no, I get it. And I never asked a musician again.
I've been there many times where I get the gatekeeper. You got to talk to my agent.
We've had that here for 2 years now. So
yeah. Well, that's when I had the idea and I decided I was going to write the book. I stopped trying to reach musicians because I could spend 2 years just trying to reach out to Corey Taylor. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to write that book, and I wouldn't have been interested in writing that book. So that gatekeeping part of it is a tightly controlled commodity, very tightly controlled.
Yeah, if anything, it's likely just gotten more strict. Now that social media, you think you have a direct line to a said artist, but it's actually controlled by a third party.
It gives the illusion. It gives the illusion you have contact with them, but I mean, try sending a direct message to any of them.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's always the same as it's ever been. Somebody wrote that it's the same as it ever was.
Different masks,
it's really
right?
true.
Different masks as Slipknot does every touring cycle. Different masks.
Absolutely.
Scott, I wanted to circle back to one thing that's obviously music adjacent with your festival, which is the tattoo element. Down here in Southern California, we have Muse Inc., which is Travis Barker's music and tattoo festival, which has actually been defunct for the last few years, but it's pretty mainstream now. But when you launched this, like we were talking about earlier, tattoos it was just taboo, it was illegal in a lot of states. Essentially, like you're already trying to do the impossible, but then you're adding an additional layer of complexity and adding the tattoo element in a traveling festival. It's almost like, I'm a pipe dream person. So this is probability of success is very low.
Yeah. And I spoke to Concerts West when I met with Irving Azoff, and I spoke to him and I spoke to Concerts West, the Paul Gangwar, who's still one of the big guys in music. He told me, he's like, listen, we tried bringing a tattoo artist on last Ozfest and it was a pain. So we have no interest. I tried to get a booth at the first Coachella, and they told me that tattooing didn't fit with their sensibility.
Wow.
Tattoos, that it was too gutter. Times have changed. So that's sort of what we were looking at, that people just didn't want to deal with it. And like I said, we had a couple of markets where they did not let us tattoo. Some places could care less what we did. Some made us go through classes in Kansas. So it was a hassle. And we really had trouble that first tour with the tattoo artists, keeping them. We did it in tents, and it was really hot. And, we were learning a lot, traveling with it, and would have fixed it the second year, but we didn't get the chance. But it was a hassle, and it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way around the country.
Well, and you had places where you had gotten the okay, and maybe local law enforcement didn't know about the okay.
That happened in the Golf Dome, which was like an indoor golf driving range. And it was like, the best part about it is to do the load in. It had a pressurized hallway. So you had to bring in a load of equipment, close the door behind you, like wait 5 minutes till everything repressurized, and then open up the door to the venue. So it took like 10 hours to load everything in. And it was 100 degrees, man. I mean, it was just so hot. It was horrible. And tattooing was illegal in Bridgeview, Illinois. And I got the mayor to let us I wrote him a letter, and I have the letter, that we could do a tattoo demonstration, and they didn't tell the cops. And they just started hassling us and went after one of our international artists because his visa wasn't in order, and they're trying to escape. And I mean, people were throwing up. It was 100 degrees, passing out. It was horrible, man. I wrote that I almost went on the second floor of the venue with a driver and was just going to start wailing balls into the crowd, but it was too much effort to get up there. I had to walk up to the second level to do it. It was too hot. It was a good idea. It was just too hot. But it was terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Did that venue know what they signed up for? I'm just thinking, like, growing up, we'd have friends that would book VFW halls and punk bands would play. And there's an old guy that says, sure, give me $300. And then he comes the next day and the windows are broken. Like, did they know what they had signed up for?
They had absolutely no idea. We did the show in Des Moines. We did our show in Des Moines, Slipknot's hometown, and we got banned after it, basically for the language. And the promoter literally came up to me and he's like, you have to do something about the language on the stage. I'm like, you crazy? Yeah. Like, if I if I wanted to, even if I wanted to, if I said something, they would just start cursing just nonstop. The rest of the show will just be them saying motherfucker until curfew. So I don't think they fully got what was coming their way.
Mhm.
I don't think the metal world was ready for it, frankly. I think it took everybody by surprise.
Because they're used to clear channel, Ticketmaster venues that are polished and amphitheaters, and where this was, hey, a golf dome or a fairgrounds, a rodeo. I mean, it's DIY as it gets. I love it.
I know, horse tracks.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the Warped Tour does that as part of their sensibility. It's sort of a do-it-yourself. To them, a stage is taking two long planks between two trucks. But that's not how we were going out. And the few amphitheaters we did play were just, I mean, what a difference, man. It was like night and day for the tattooing, for everything. So that part of it was really the stress of taking out a first-time venture with the tattooing in these secondary markets. We didn't know what bands were going to show up until the first show. We thought Booyah was going to show up. We didn't have the end of the tour booked at the first show. If you look at that tour book that's in the book, it's completely wrong. I mean, there's nothing right in that tour book, and that's what we went out with. So it was just, from the beginning, an insane venture with everything else on top of it. And then we've got Slipknot and Slayer and Sepultura and Seven Dust and leave
Scott,
off the last S for Satan.
What the hell were you thinking, Scott?
I felt such pride, man. I'm like, you know what? The kids need some place to let it out. I had that sense back then that I was doing a service, that this was a place where you wouldn't be judged and you could come and kick the shit out of each other and go home and feel good about it. And you're not going to go shoot up your school. Like, I felt that sense of pride of being able to give these kids a place to be able to do this.
I agree. I didn't even have the angst, but I was subscribed to Kerrang magazine, and I used to pick up Circus and Hit Parader on the weekly or month, I guess weekly for Kerrang and monthly for Circus and Hit Parader, and seeing like these amazing photos of metal festivals in Europe. I'm like, fuck, man, nothing like that exists over here except for Ozfest, and then obviously Europe Festival. So yeah, like you said, you were serving a need, a niche that was fulfilled.
Yeah, and I wanted to take tattooing out of I wanted to bring it more to the mainstream, and I didn't want, what's happened with tattooing was my goal in doing it was to bring this amazing art form, to acceptance. And I really do find it amazing if I'm watching TV that mainstream ads, not neck tattoos, and I mean, everybody is just tatted up. It still blows my mind. Even, like, I'm still not quite used to it. Like, wow, this really is different.
It's mainstream now.
Yeah. If you had a neck tattoo 20 years ago, you were you needed to be a metal musician, or we used to, how many people could tower records higher? Right. What were you going to do? There weren't many things you could do. And now it doesn't matter. And that part of it is really great, because that's what it was about, is just letting people be themselves and have a safe place to do it.
Yep. Fast forward 2022 and Post Malone is on a Budweiser commercial on prime time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just even Miley Cyrus, all of her tats. And the funny thing is 20 years ago, if you had tattoos like that where it wasn't a sleeve and it was just sort of like placed, that would have been thought to be really amateurish.
Like a poser, right? Yeah.
A poser. And now that's absolutely the style. And in some ways, I wish that I had a free arm, because that would be kind of cool. So it's just evolved into an art form, and the tattooing is just amazing. What people are doing now, it's just remarkable. It's pretty cool.
So Scott, I want to circle back to like the initial vision. So obviously, when you cook this up, you're getting tattooed. You're thinking of this festival. You got music. You got tattoos, and then there's a part in the book where it all comes to fruition. You look around and you say, this isn't what I cooked up in my head. So I'm curious what you actually did cook up in your head. Like what was different about when it came to fruition versus your original thought?
Well, I mean, as far as the music, I just didn't envision it with metal. I wasn't a metal fan. I'd never really even listened to Slayer or New Slayer. That part of it was, I didn't know that, I have that hippie sensibility that I grew up with, where everybody will have tattoos and that type of thing. And this was something different. And I just had to adjust my sights, because I totally got what this aspect of it was. I just needed to, because like I said, to me, I'm still 16 in my head. So I can understand that rage and that feeling of isolation and alienation. And I sort of held on to that because at first the music was just like so foreign. You know, I grew up on the Beatles, man. I need a melody and a bridge and a chorus. So that's what was a challenge to a certain degree.
I think it worked. I mean, a Slayer fan is more apt to have a tattoo than a Beatles fan or an Aerosmith fan.
That is no, absolutely. No, I and that's when I realized it's not what I want. I'm a 40-year-old guy who's really out of touch.
Yeah.
And I may have a level of hipness and all that, and maybe I can hang, but I don't know what kids want and that's where this guy, Lauren Bouquet, who was, he's in a band called Drown. And I met him, and he's the one who turned me on to Slipknot and a lot of the bands that were on. I could pull out an old list that from being on a phone call with him that probably has most of the lineup on it.
Wow.
And he's like, get Slipknot. They just went platinum. Because we were trying to get Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it would have been great if they did it, but we would have been swallowed alive with our brand.
Yeah.
He was like, find a new, hot, hard, edgy band that's dangerous, and that was Slipknot. So he really pointed us in that direction. But I could see us moving in that direction as I went to festivals in Europe. My audience was Metallica, Monster Magnet. You know, that was I could see is that was, you know, and it wouldn't be now. You could do a more mainstream Tattoo the Earth. And that was originally my idea, was let's start it with metal and mainstream it as it went out, sort of like Warped Tour did. And, you know, but back then it was Renegade.
And speaking of Renegade, you have mentioned it, and we mentioned the Suffolk Downs date. You guys were permanently banned from how many different places?
2. We ended up banned from 2 out of 18 shows.
Yeah.
But in the first 8, we were banned from 2, and one was Slipknot's hometown show, and then my hometown show.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got banned. We got banned from Revere for life. They had a meeting like the next day. Old ladies were driving around Revere trying to figure out where the party was so they could shut it down.
Wow.
And Slipknot and Tattoo the Earth were banned for life.
Scott, that's a good thing. Revere Beach, no one needs to go there. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. It was a good venue, though. The sad part is, you know, we were struggling, and that was a good venue. We did over 10,000 people. Like, it's fun now. And even then, I had a sense of pride of like, hey, cool, fuck you, we got banned. And John Peters, who's the promoter, is like, well, where are we going to do it next year?
Right.
Like, we're outsiders. I don't have access to amphitheaters and arenas. Like, there aren't that many places to do this other than a parking lot. What was that? Local Bazooka used to do it at that airport in Fitchburg.
Oh, yeah.
So there was a problem. There aren't that many alternative venues, and we were being blocked out of all of them. So, you know, as cool as it seemed at the time, and I even had that sense at the time, it really was fucked up. It's like, oh, man.
2 out of the first 8. That's wild.
2 out of the first 8 were banned for life. Waterworks Park in Iowa, they just didn't ban they banned all music.
Wow.
No concerts anymore, though they rescinded it a few years later.
Wow.
Which is at the end of the book, the final thing in the book. But yeah, it was... and every show was like that. In Kansas, we were at a small community park, and stage lit on fire because of the pyro, and mud pits and just floods and busts. You know, it was just every show was just a disaster. But the fans had a great time, and that's what I have to separate even now. Because I found I was bumming out some of the fans who were feeling bad for me because I had such a shitty time, and it was the best time of their life. So I've sort of chilled on that a little bit, because I knew at the time I'm not having a good time, and it doesn't matter. I'm not there to have a good time. You know, I just didn't want to have such a shitty time. Right. You know, like, yeah, I just wanted to get out of it alive.
I mean, it's that business part of your brain that was serving a need. You saw something, you saw an opportunity, and basically captured a blip in history that, between like the lack of social media and just the organic scene that was happening, like Ozfest aside, I don't think anyone captured it in the moment. And I think it's basically, it seems like it was all timing, and you just happened to be there and happen to have the cash flow and infrastructure and, I don't know, relentless soul to just make it happen.
And Slipknot decided to do it. And that's and that was the double-edged sword, because they'd already agreed to headline the second stage at Ozfest for 2000, and then we stole them away.
That's insane.
And that pissed off Sharon Osbourne, and that ended up, I mean, you know, that really hurt. So it was a double-edged sword. It's like, yay, we got Slipknot, we got all these bands, but we're also have a giant target on our back, and we lost half our shows. So I would have been just as happy going out with a small band, that, you know, a tour that was headlined by Sepultura, you know, and go under the radar. That really was my goal. And we just didn't go under the radar. We landed on top of both the Warped Tour and Ozfest, sort of screwed up their summers too. So it was just a crazy summer, you know.
Mm-hmm. And just for like real context too, like Ozfest was king. Like they launched in what, 95? You got Sharon Osbourne, who's a Titan. And then obviously Ozzy. So like the bands that were even on the festival, like they looked up to Ozzy like he's like the godfather of metal. Like we're gonna drop off this festival in favor of this other one.
This other one. These outsiders called Tattoo the Earth.
Yeah.
With Slipknot. And that was Slipknot. You know, that was Steve Richards, their manager, who died shortly thereafter the tour. But he screwed Sharon Osbourne. I mean, they shook on it. They had lunch and shook on it, and then he screwed her over and ended up doing our tour, and then ended up doing the same thing to us the next year when we were going to go out and do our second year, and we offered Slipknot 25% of our tour, whether they played or not.
Which is huge. That's enormous.
Huge, enormous. I don't even think Steve Richards took the offer to them. I think he was planning to play us all along, and you know, Ozfest just doubled the offers. And if we doubled them again, they would have doubled them again.
Wow.
And you know, Clear Channel owns almost every amphitheater. They own thousands of radio stations. They own like 200,000 billboards. So you can't. I mean, we just couldn't even compete. They spent a couple of $1 million probably to put us out of business for that second tour. And the funny thing is, as a business person, everybody was like, "Oh, I can't believe Sharon Osbourne did that to you." I'm like, my only regret is I couldn't do it to her.
Right.
I wasn't in this to make friends. I was in this to build a business and to make money and build a movement. And I didn't begrudge her doing that. When I was in business, I did worse things to people who came in and just shit on my little territory. So that part of it, even then, everybody was all up in arms. And I'm like, hey, we deserve it. We just screwed up Kevin Lyman and Sharon Osbourne. Like we took their bands, and there's, you know, so I had that sense even back then as a business person, which probably saved me because I wasn't getting emotionally involved with taking it personally. And
it's a long play for her too. If she can eliminate you early, then they own the landscape.
They owned the landscape until Summer Sanitarium. They owned that landscape for the next 15 years. Yep. They had no competition for the first 10 years unless it was another CAA tour going out. You know, so I would have done the same thing as a business decision. So that part of it I fully got. You know, whether I liked it or not is another thing. But
yeah.
I understood it, and I never took it personally.
That's good. I mean, to have the thick skin in that industry is you need it, right? I mean, that stuff happens.
Well, you know, like I write in the book that I care what happened as long as the show happened. Like I really, even though my ego was out of control for a lot of it, it was the most selfless thing I've ever done. I just wanted it to succeed. Mm-hmm. And that was the heartbreaking thing for me, is just no one would leave it alone. You know, like they just never gave it a chance to really turn into something. And that was really the bummer. Everybody, and that's Slipknot, everybody just grabbing at it. It's a new thing. It's the new person in town. You know, they make you pay double for everything because it's your first, you know, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And that just felt like they were clawing at me. And that part of it I took personally. You like, just give it a fucking break. Just if everybody would just stop trying to kill this thing for 1 second, let's just see what it's going to be.
Right.
But it had too much bearing down on it.
Well, gun to head, they probably would have loved it. The idea, like, well, I wish we had done this. Like, that's why they needed to, you know, make sure it went away, because, hey, man, we're going to lose to them at some point because the idea is good.
The idea is really good. And that's my partner in this. When we meant to do the agent meetings, he's like, the first agent we met, he's like, the first thing he's going to tell you is why it won't work. And the reason he's going to do that is because it wasn't his idea. Because agents don't get a lot of ideas, let alone good ones. And we sat down, and the first thing was, I'm going to tell you why this doesn't work. Andy Summers was the agent from Bandwagon. Wow. I'll tell you why it won't work. So, you know, and that's where, you know, and when we met with CAA and this agent, and they basically were like, we're going to buy this show. It was like a movie. That's when Sharon and Kevin Lyman got involved and saw, rightly so, you're screwing up our summer. You're adding another lifestyle festival. And Ozfest may have been the king back then, but they'd only been around as a real tour a couple of years. Yeah. They'd only put on a couple of full-fledged tours, as did Warped Tour. So they were, in retrospect, in their infancy. They weren't as established as they seem now. And in that respect, I think they felt truly attacked, like we're not established enough to have to deal with this and have CAA bring on another tour, you know, because we wanted to do Green Day. That's what they wanted to do at CAA, and that just freaked Kevin Lyman and everybody out.
Wow.
You just said something that kind of reminded me of an interview I saw with Elon Musk, which is he was going to start SpaceX, and his, advisors at the time kept showing him montages of rockets blowing up. They're like, this is a 6-minute montage of rockets blowing up, and this is why you shouldn't do it. He's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah. So it sounds like you kind of followed that same route. You're like, you knew you had that moment in 1998, and you're like, I'm going to fucking do this. I don't care what any of you guys say. I'm going to fucking do this.
It's going to happen. I'm going to do this. And I had so many things, and I didn't get that sense of it writing the book, as people who are reading it, like, man, I just can't believe you never gave up. Like, what were you thinking? I just was not going to be deterred. And I got busted and I got sick, and it just didn't matter. I just knew it was going to happen. I knew I would be standing in it one day. I would not be deterred. And
the talent you got. I mean, those bands, you basically gave them like an SNL platform to springboard from, because a lot of the bands you had on Tattoo the Earth became kind of titans in their own right. Like Seven Dust, like Slipknot. We've mentioned Slipknot a lot, but you had, Seven Dust, Head PE, Slayer was
They're all
big.
touring. They're all touring as we speak.
Going.
Nashville Pussy. Second stage bands didn't survive as well. That's where Cold, 1 Minute Silence, Systematic. I don't think there are very few. There may not be any of the other than Nashville Pussy that are still around. So in that respect, they had their moment. But those are the record company slots. They pay for those.
Oh, true. Yep.
Those slots, and they did that with us too. But yes, that main stage, you could put out the same show and it would be, Slayer did that farewell tour, was enormous. So it's even bigger than it was back then. And they're all touring.
So Scott, you said you were, I guess, more maybe a classic rock guy, and this was, new exposure for you. Who did you connect with on the tour? I'm curious about, bands that you really either liked as people or liked the music, or even their live show.
Sure. I really, I like Slipknot, the band, the guys. I liked Clown a lot, and Corey. I just thought they were I just liked them. At first, I didn't like the music, and I even write in the book, like, once I let my guard down and just changed my expectations of what it should be and sort of absorbed it, I really started getting into it. I sort of started getting it. But it didn't move me. Seven Dust is a band that I really liked because they had that mix of, like, metal and classic rock. UPO, I liked. Full Devil Jacket. The stuff that had more of a classic rock thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like Slayer just doesn't do it for me. It just doesn't. It just, and I get it. And I get why it does for other people, but it just doesn't move me.
Right on.
Yep. And Slipknot doesn't either, but I get why it does, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally.
And I knew watching those shows, if I was 16, I wouldn't have wimped out like Nate and I would have stolen a car or done something to get there. I would have been in the mosh pit just getting a concussion, and I'd be 22 years later writing about it on Instagram, so I knew that. It's just, I was an old guy and I grew up differently, but I had that sense all along.
It's so funny.
Why I could connect with the kids too. Yeah.
It's so funny you said steal the car, because that was actually the plan. We were going to steal my buddy's.
Nice.
He was living with his grandmother. He was going to steal his grandmother's car, and we were going to go down to.
And he would have too.
Suffolk Downs. Oh yeah.
He definitely would have.
You should have just said that. You should say to the grandmother, "We're going to go to the horse track. Can you just drive us there?"
2 hours away.
110 miles away.
110 miles away, and she gets there, and there's like Slipknot.
That's amazing. She'd be driving around trying to stop the party.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I always had that sense, and that's why I think I could MC and I could connect with the kids, because I'm still one of them. I'm just an old man, and I still feel that way at 61, which is a really cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's never changed. Earlier today, I got in the car and just fucking, rolled a joint and listened to Quadrophenia, and I have this great road that I go on, just driving fast, listening to The Who, smoking a joint, thinking about the book, and you know what I mean? Like the same shit I was doing when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is what it is. My wife would say it's not good, but I never lost that love of rock and roll. It just, to this day, just,
there are far worse things you could be doing, Scott. Far worse things.
Absolutely. That's what I tell my wife. The best things about this world are dogs and rock and roll, man, and pot. But a lot of people can do without the pot. But yeah, so that's. But it's keeping that sensibility and being able to be a business person and not be a total maroon running around. People needed to know that you were stable and that you could, it was that fine line that I think you run of being eccentric or whatever, and then still being capable of pulling it off. And I think people just always thought I could pull it off.
Yeah, and you think you kind of brought it full circle with The Who too, because that album's very much like a rock opera that was, Roger and Pete kind of, and all the band members kind of come into like an idea like, hey, let's make this wild idea an album. That's a story that's being told through, this whole album front to back. And it seems like that's what you did with this book, which is something we are stoked on. We love the book.
Excellent.
We want to let the listeners know where can we find this book?
This book, it will be available on Amazon.
Nice.
Barnes & Noble, we're doing an audiobook, Kindle. They can go on the website, caravanofpain.com. I'm also putting the entire archive on Instagram and Facebook. And you can catch us at Flogging the Book on Grindr and Tinder. If you're looking for, no, I'm joking. No, shaking your head. It's like it's in.
I was like, "Where's he going with this?"
Is that another one? Yeah, sure. All right.
Sex sells.
Yeah, at Flogging the Buck. I think that's gonna. But yeah, it'll be widely available on March 15th.
About a week from now.
About a week from now, and it's been getting really good response. Loudwire is going to do a thing on it the day that it's released, an excerpt, and just got a good review in Kirkus Reviews, and a lot of good things are happening. People are really responding to it. It's very cool. And it's really cool speaking to people who went to the show or like you guys were kids.
Wished we could go.
Coming full circle. Like, I just real quick, I found it really poignant that, 22 years ago, I was in my underwear at 3 a.m. And, some kid is emailing me going, why aren't you playing St. Louis? You big da-da-da-da-da. And then on Instagram last week, some guy emailed me, why didn't you guys play St. Louis?
The same guy.
I'm like, I'm the same guy. I'm like, read the book, man. So that part of it has been really poignant. I really like that part of it, is connecting people with their childhoods like that. Something that was meaningful has been really fantastic for me.
Hell yeah.
So it's been really good talking to you guys too, because I can see it. This was a touchstone for you guys.
Hell yeah. And I mean, go read the book, guys. Go buy the book right now. The links are in our show notes. If you can't, spell Caravan of Pain, you can just click on it in there. So yeah, go buy the book.
And it's an inspiring story. I mean, a lot of people don't know the origins of ideas and whatnot and how they come about, and they think they're backed by a lot of money and all this. But I think, at least for us who kind of know the grind, at least through this podcast, like we can relate to it in some aspects, and we appreciate it even that much more. So
excellent. I appreciate that.
It was a great read. It would have been a one-sit read if I didn't have 2 infants.
The old 2 infant excuse. Are they the same age?
No.
If they were twins, that would be different, man.
Then it's valid.
2 under 2 is no joke.
No, 2 under 2 is no joke. I have one 14-year-old, and that's no joke, man. So this is the easy part. Everybody told me this is the easy part right now.
Yeah.
Congratulations, man. That's great. And like I said, it was written for you. It was written for the fans. It wasn't written as a textbook. It's written in my voice to you guys, and that you responded to it is really cool. Yeah, really cool.
We definitely did. I mean, we were sending each other excerpts and be like, "Oh man, I can't wait to ask about this. I want people to hear about this." Like, it was definitely worth the time, guys. So go check it out.
Excellent. I really appreciate it.
Scott, thank you for coming on with us tonight, man. Really appreciate talking with you about Tattoo the Earth, which is 22 now, and the book comes out on March 15th. So about a week from now.
Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. There you have it. The founder of the Tattoo the Earth Festival, which is in our mind, and I think many people out there, a very iconic music festival in 2000, especially for the new metal crowd, which is still relevant today. So we, obviously kind of dove deep into that scene then. And I knew it was a vibe then. Like, I think we all remember, like, man, this is like our scene. Like, I read about grunge and I read about classic rock, and it's all cool, but like, we actually lived this. And the fact that we had Scott on to give us the background infrastructure to a festival like this, in a way that I think you guys said, like, pie in the sky, like, this is the way I operate. Like, I want to do this. I'm going to make it happen. He actually had the capital to make it a go. So to have him on and really dive in and really give us some really candid stories on what happens. And obviously the book goes even deeper, but man, he didn't hold back at all, which is fantastic.
Yeah, no, he was a great guest to talk to, and reliving some of those, early putting together the festival days, and then how he was just like, I'll hop on a plane and go anywhere and talk to anybody to make this happen, because it was so ingrained into who he wanted to be at that time, and then put this thing together that ended up obviously happening and being something we're still talking about today in 2022, 22 years later. So pretty badass to be able to talk to him about it. And he wrote a book about it, which you guys got to go check out.
And I read the book, and I'm someone who does love to read, but I don't have a lot of time between work, kids, and the podcast. I made time for this. It was a two-sitter, I'll call it, two-sitter session read. And it would have been one if I didn't get interrupted. And it's interesting. It's more than just the festival. The festival, in my eyes, is a vehicle for someone who had a vision, had a passion, executed on that vision. But there's also this theme of, kind of redemption and overcoming, which Scott hinted at in the interview. You throw heavy music in there, a heavy tour, music industry jargon, that's Nate's like wet dream, right? And honestly, I'm not blowing smoke up our listeners' ass. It is the perfect book for anyone that has listened to this podcast. Even if you're not a Slayer fan, even if you're not a Slipknot fan, which I think most everyone is that listens to us, check it out. Great read, easily digestible. You can pre-order it on Amazon, and it comes out, what, 3/15, Tone?
Yep, 3/15/22, so about a week from today. All right, cool. Yeah, so hit us up on the socials at Podioslave on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Podioslavepodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, we'll be back next week with more, but it's going to be hard to top these last couple weeks, guys. 3 interviews in a row, 3 really kind of different but similar nerdery vibes. Man, I love this shit. I love doing this with you guys. So yeah, thanks to everybody who's listened, and we'll be back next week.
3 words, Caravan of Pain. Go order it, pre-order it, Amazon. Let's go.
Yeah, Geeks Unite. It has got everything for everyone. Like Twan said, it is a wet dream for the music industry stuff. And even if you weren't, it's obviously the bands associated in the book. It's just nice to get some backstory on that. But yeah, industry-wise, it's a blueprint, and the good and the bad and the ugly and whatever else. Like, it's the behind the music version in a book format. And Scott nailed it. So, and we really appreciate him coming on. So to all the nerds out there, cheers.
Peace, potheads.
See you next week.
I did one of these, some guys who actually were at the show, so it's interesting with people who weren't.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
because everybody I spoke to who was at the show broke their nose, got a concussion, they lost their shoe, they've lost their car. Everybody had something happen to them who has contacted me from that show, that they were injured in some way. Yeah.
And they were probably prideful of it too. Right?
Oh,
like,
completely.
I love it. This is great.
Completely. And some kids like on Instagram, he's like, that was my first show. I was 12. I'm like, man, I'm so proud. I helped you on the road to ruin. And here we are 22 years later, and you're in your 30s and still doing it. So that part of it I really like. That's the part of it I always really liked. That's the part that Slipknot really, their dedication to their fans and vice versa. I knew that 20 years ago that was something unique. And obviously it was, because it was extraordinary. And they're bigger now than they were then. Mm-hmm. It's really incredible.